Welcome to the summit. Now, 12 years ago, if you talked about social mobility in the House of Commons, they would have thought you were talking about rural bus services for the elderly. I guess our biggest achievement is that we have played a big part in putting social mobility on the map.
Social mobility has always been an issue of profound importance. I believe now it's an issue of profound urgency for our country too. It's a simple but powerful concept that everybody should have the chance to be the best version of themselves that they can be.
Now, social mobility is arguably the biggest social issue of our time.
I'm truly delighted to be part of this 20th anniversary celebration, but also, of course, in Sutton Trust fashion, a summit looking at what we need to do in the next 20 years ahead of us. The good news is that we increasingly know what works, in no small part thanks to the Sutton Trust. I think your 20 years are 20 years to be truly proud of.
In 2005, we asked Steve Machin and his team to look at what's happened to social mobility in Britain. They showed that social mobility had declined, and together with the United States, we have the lowest level of social mobility for advanced countries. These findings have had an enormous impact.
So absolute mobility is actually falling in Britain. I think this puts an actual much bigger spin on the importance for policy here, but actually in the past it used to be that relative mobility was not very high and probably fell, but we had absolute mobility as people's wages were growing in the labour market. We haven't got many more. We haven't had that for about 15 years now.
We've moved from an economy that used to be worried about unemployment in the recessions when I was growing up in the 1970s and the 1980s to one that is now concerned about low pay, poverty and inequality.
Now, the really disturbing thing about mobility in Britain today is that while the total absolute rate is more or less constant, the downward component of this rate is increasing, while the upward component is decreasing. So this means that young people today have less favourable mobility prospects than did their parents or their grandparents.
On education, you can see that there is more pessimism than optimism and on opportunities for young people. And in some ways, the fact that people are increasingly pessimistic about the young, I think is a real leitmotif, if you like, of some of the challenges that our society now faces.
The kids, by the time they even get to primary school, if they come from a poor socioeconomic background, they're being left behind to a far greater extent.
When you look at independent research, the Bank of England has suggested that there are 15 million jobs in the UK that may be wholly or partly impacted through automation. And clearly that creates both a threat and an opportunity as far as social mobility is concerned.
What I'm arguing really is that we need a society in which we begin to revalue certain jobs and redefine what we mean by the social ladder, rather than unquestioningly assuming that what we should be about is getting a few people into the so-called top jobs. We need to determine what those top jobs are.
For me, the key area of policy change, based on the evidence, would be finding ways to support and incentivise the quality of teaching in areas of social disadvantage and indeed schools that are particularly struggling.
And I think the main thing I want to underline about what's next for social mobility, as we as a department are increasingly seeing it, is to really address how social mobility happens in places. We haven't thought hard enough about how our policies affect different places.
The decisions on where to build new roads, where to extend railways, where to do industry has to be about the poorest areas and has to be linked to apprenticeships, skills development and local schools.
I don't think the education sector can handle the truth because we need more money, we know that, but you can do it within the resources that you've got. You've got to look after your teachers, happy staff.
We could imagine a world where education, if you had enough will and enough investment, could be used to improve social mobility. We would need to disproportionately invest in the poor, and if you did that, some levelling might happen.
Our research suggests that if we could improve our mobility, we would observe significantly higher levels of productivity. Raising our performance to the Western European average could result in the long run in the UK being better off by around 2% of GDP, around 39 billion.
I really do believe that the whole point of schools, and I say this all the time, is that children come first. and that everything we do, and I mean everything we do, must reflect this single goal.